Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Let me know if you can hear me in the comment section. All right. Today is the sixth day of our Linux cloud security, cloud engineer, and DevOps class. Today we are going to be looking at Linux networking. On Friday, which was our fifth class, we look at the Linux package management. We deploy a web server on our Linux. We deploy a website on our Linux web server. So today we are going to be looking at the Linux networking. So under the Linux networking today, we are going to be looking at how do you transfer file from one Linux server to another Linux server, or how do you transfer file from your desktop server or your local host, how do you transfer it to the remote server? Should in case you have a particular file on your local server and you want to migrate the file to your remote server, how do you move file from one place to another in Linux, which is very important if you want to be using Linux. And also today we are going to be looking at Linux networking troubleshooting. If you spin up a server and you are trying to connect to the server, but the communication couldn't be established, then you need to do a lot of troubleshooting and try to see where the networking or where the communication is stopping. So we're going to be looking at some tools today that you can use to troubleshoot what is actually causing um, the two networking or the networks, the two servers not to be able to communicate together. We are going to be looking at that today. Also, after the Linux networking, we are going to be looking at the final part of the class, the introduction to shell scripting. How do you start writing shell scripts? You know how to write a lot of commands. So how do you put this command together to turn it into a shell script? So under Linux networking is the heart of making two systems or two servers to be able to communicate with each other. You have network A that wants to communicate to network B, or you have network B that want to communicate with network C. So you need to allow all the two servers to be able to communicate together. When you are running Linux web server or any server communication, any site communication, you want to ensure that the two servers allow the communications to take place. So I will quickly draw a little diagram to show you the Linux networking or the networking generally. So if we have one system, let me share. Excuse me. Let's say you have. Let's say this is your. Okay, let me use the normal computer. Let's say you have this computer here. Let's say this is your local host, your personal computer or your office computer, which is normally referred to as local computer. And you have an office server. Let's just use laptop to represent your office server. If those, which is going to refer to as remote host now. So if these two systems needs to communicate together, we need to establish the communication. One, if the two systems are not on the same network. If the two systems are not on the same network, then you need to ensure that the internet is enabled. So for instance, now, for instance, if both of them are on AWS cloud and both of them are on the same VPC, that means they are on the same network. So by default, they should be able to communicate together because this is their network. They are on the same network this way, and they should be able to communicate together because VPC is a network. But if you are trying to connect your system to, let's say you are using a local host. This server here is on AWS. This server is on AWS, and this one is not on AWS. This is your local host. So how do you communicate from this server to this server? Then there are some connections that must be made before the two systems can be able to communicate together. First, you need to ensure that this server here, because it is in a private network, then you need to ensure that it can actually communicate to the server, or the server outside of the network can communicate to it. And how can the server on the outside of this network can communicate to this to the remote host that is inside a specific network? One, you need to ensure that this server here has access to the internet so that the network, the computers on the internet can able to reach out to it. But for this fact, it doesn't have access to the internet. So the first thing you need to do, you need to establish access to the internet first so that this computer here can communicate to the internet, and those on the internet that are not in the same network can also communicate to it. So that is the first thing you need to ensure. And also, second thing is, so to ensure that, I may quickly use AWS NAT Gateway, an AWS Internet Gateway. So I may use Internet Gateway to establish this communication and make sure that, okay, now this is just a symbol or an icon that shows that, okay, this network here can actually communicate to the internet now. So now that this network can communicate to the internet, the next thing that you want to ensure is that this server that wants to communicate to the internet, how would the server or the computer on the internet, how would they want to interact with this server here? If computer on the internet wants to interact with this server here, how would they interact with it? Are they going to use HTTP, which is over the browser? HTTP, which is over the browser, or are they going to use SSH, which is more like a secure protocol? So whichever one that they want to use, if that particular port is not open on this server, they will not be able to communicate with each other. So that is the first thing that you want to ensure, that the server here, that is the first thing that you want to ensure, that the server here can actually communicate over, the outside computer can communicate to the local host, can communicate to the remote host using this specific port that you open. So if this local host want to communicate to the remote host, then how do they want to communicate with it? If they want to communicate over the browser, then on this remote host, you have to open SSH. But if they want to communicate over the SSH, you need to open HTTP. But if they want to communicate over the over the SSH, then you need to open port SSH for this. So all these have to be ensured before the two servers can communicate to each other. If a server, let's say this, if you want to use web browser, then SSH has to be opened on this local host. On the firewall of this remote host, you have to open SSH HTTP. But if this local host want to communicate to the remote host over over SSH, then you need to open SSH so that they can be able to access the server over the SSH. So these are the first thing that you want to make sure before the two servers can communicate to each other. Now, let's say all this has been established. Because we want to be able to send files. So for us to communicate over SSH on this remote host, let's assuming that the SSH is enabled already on the security group or on the firewall. So the next thing to do now is now to start on sending the file. So let's start with this first one. The first one is that how to copy a file from a local host to a remote host. So what we want to do now is that we want to copy a file that is in my desktop. So let's say we want to copy any of this file now that is on my local host, and we want to copy it and send it to our web server, which is on AWS account. So how do we do that? As I said earlier, the first thing that you need to ensure is that the two servers agreed on the mode of communication. If they want to communicate over SSH, then on the remote host, you have to you have to configure this firewall to allow SSH. But if they want to communicate over the browser, which is like you viewing a website, then you have to, on the remote host, HTTPS or HTTP has to be opened. Otherwise, they will not be able to establish the communication. So I've opened the SSH on my remote server so the communication can be established. So I'm going to connect to my server, which is I'm going to connect to my server, which is on the AWS, on my AWS account. So I'm using this YouTube server 2. So all I just need to do is to get the IP address, then go to my SSH client, do SSH -I. Then the key that I want to use to connect, the key is called the YouTube key. I want to use this YouTube key because that is the key I used to configure the server. So, and the username is called the EC2, and the IP address is this is the IP address. So now this is me establishing connection between, just SSH into that server. So now I can assure that, okay, SSH is opened on the server because now I can SSH from my local host. I can connect from my local host to the server. So now that I can connect from my local host to the server, actually what I want to do is not to connect. I want to send file from my local host to my server, which means this file that you are seeing there on my local host, I want to send them to my web server, to my server that is running on AWS account, which is a remote host. So let me first check, do I have any file here? So I have two files here, two folder. Folder 1, folder 2. Folder 1, this one has lowercase and this one has uppercase. I can change the name to something here. So I'm going to change the name to, I'm going to change the folder 1. I'm going to change it to folder 2. So that way I have folder 1 and folder 2. So if I do ls now, so I have folder 1, folder 2. So what I want to do, I also want to change this one has a lowercase. I want to change it to an uppercase. So I can also do the same thing, move, but this time around, I'm moving folder 1, I'm moving it to capital letter folder 1. So now if I do ls, so both of them are in uppercase, folder 1, folder 2. So that is first thing I need to ensure. So if you look at my screen, we only have folders, we don't have file. So but the file that I want to use here, I want to copy a file from my local host. I want to move the file to my remote host, which is this one here. So for me to move that, I need to go back to my local host. So now I'm on my local host now. So I'm on my local host. I can do ls, and you're going to see all these files that you are seeing here. These are the files here. So I want to move a file from here to my remote host. So to do that, I have to copy. Copy is when you are moving a file. You say copy. But this kind of copy that I want to do, if I can't do the normal copy because this is not secure, so I have to use a secure copy. I have to use a secure copy. So the secure copy, I just need to append X before the C and P. So this means I'm using a secure copy. And once I want to copy, I have to do -i. Then I have to put the key of the server that I want to connect to. Then this is the key of the server that I want to connect to. Then the file that I want to send to my remote host is what I'm going to put next. So the file is called, let me move the file, demo file, this file. Let me move this file to the remote host. I'm going to call it demo file. And once I move the demo file to the remote host, the next thing I want to do, I want to specify the username of the remote host and the IP address of the remote host. So the IP address, let me copy the IP address from here. So I paste the IP address. So now that I've paste the IP address, I need to specify where I'm moving the file to in my remote host. In my remote host, I have to specify where precisely I'm moving the file to. So to specify where you are moving the file to, you just need to put a colon. Then the next thing you are going to type is the particular path of where you are moving the file to. If I want to move the file to my EC2 server on home directory, I have to put /home/EC2 server, EC2 user. So this is me. The reason why I'm moving it to my EC2 server home directory, because I'm logging in as an EC2 user. And if I want to copy a file to another directory that is not EC2 user, and if the EC2 user do not have permissions to copy a file inside that directory, it will not be able to do it. So I will be needing permission. So the best option is to move the file directly to the EC2 home directory, where I know that EC2 user has full permissions to copy file, delete file from this folder. So that's why I'm moving the file here. But now that instead of me writing the full path like this, I can represent this with a tilde, which also specify that, okay, this is just a symbol to represent what I wrote earlier. A symbol to represent home/EC2 user. But if you don't want to write the EC2 user in full, just put a tilde there, which represents the home directory of the EC2 user. And now that I'm in home directory of the EC2 user, where do I want to put the file? I can just say I want to put the file at the home directory. So this is all I have to do. So if I iterate over this, means a secure copy, that I want to do a secure copy, and I want to sign in as SSH, that I'm doing a secure copy and I'm signing in as SSH. I'm using a YouTube key pen that I created. I'm copying this file. This is actually the file that I want to copy and send to the remote server. So the file, if you are copying something else, just specify that thing. This is the file that is moving to the remote server. Why every other thing is just when I get to the remote server, this is the user I'm going to use to log in, and this is the machine, the address of the remote server. And this is the path where I want to pull the file on the remote server. So with all of this, I just need to do enter. If I didn't get any error, that means it's successfully copied, and you can see it. It said this file has gone and it's 100% completed, and this is the size of the file. So if I log into my remote server now, if I log into my remote server, let me clear the screen. I do ls, and look at it. We don't have this file here before, but now we've moved the file from my desktop to the remote server. And if you look at my desktop now, I do not have any folder there. I don't have folder 1, I don't have folder 2 in my desktop. The same way I copied a file from my desktop, with this file to my desktop, I can copy a file also from my remote server to my desktop. So for instance, let's create a file here and call it, to create a file, use touch. Let's call it remote file.text. So if I do ls, and here is the file here. So I can also copy this file from my remote server to my local server. So the first thing I need to do, let me get us from my remote server. So now I want to copy the file. I'm already on my local server now, and there is nothing here. So to copy the file from my remote server, I just need to do exactly the same thing, but instead of specifying the file that I want to copy, look at it, I just need to remove, because I'm not copying a file to my remote server now. I want to copy from my remote server. So I just need to go to the end of the script here. So what is the file? This is me just saying I've connected. I want to copy a file from my remote server. So I just provide all the information to connect to that remote server. So all this information connects me to the remote server. And now that I've connected to the remote server, where precisely am I going on the remote server? So if I want to specify where on the remote server is the file that I want to copy, I just need to specify this path, because that is where the file is located. It's located in my home/EC2 user, and the name of the file is called remote host. Remote host dot, I think I used the remote host dot sts. So that is the file. If that is not the name of the file, we can quickly log in and check, but this is, I guess this is the file. So if I press enter now, if that file name is correct, it's going to tell us that it's correct. So it said, let me quickly log in and check the remote file. Let me log in and check the remote file. ls. Okay, it's not remote file. It's called remote file, not remote host. So I'm going to put that here just for reference. Then I'm going to exit. Then I'm going to do the same thing again. So instead of file, I'm going to do file. Instead of host, I'm going to do file. So with this, oh, I'm still having an error, like connection failed. Let me check. Clear. So I have copy YouTube, provide the key, provide the, let me use this, and remote file.text. Say copy. So if you are having something error like this, one way to troubleshoot is just do cp-help, and it's going to give you all the options that you can do with cp. So they say I should provide the -j-help. Yeah, let me check what's going on. That has worked before. Okay, so the error that I have here is that I do not specify where I want to copy to. You have to specify where you are copying to. So I want to copy to my the next part is where you are copying to on your local host. So on my local host, I'm copying to this YouTube folder that you are seeing here. So to specify the YouTube folder, I'm going to say is inside my root directory, I mean my home directory. The desktop, that file is on my desktop of my home directory and inside a YouTube folder. So if you look at it now, there is no YouTube, I mean, there is no any remote folder here. But now I've specified, I want to copy, and it's an identity file, and where I'm copying, I mean, the key that I want to use to connect to the server I'm copying from is this YouTube -key2, and this is the username that I'm using to connect to the server where I'm copying from, and this is the part of the file that I want to copy, and this is where I'm copying the file to. So with all of this, if I press enter, then it should copy the file. Now you can see that it has moved the file, which is this file here, remote file. It has moved it from our, it has copied from our remote host into our local host. Now, so this is how to copy a file from remote host to local host, and also how to copy from a local host to a remote host. So the next one that we're going to look at is how do we copy a folder. If you want to copy a folder, it's exactly the same format, except you have to just do some little adjustments. So let's first copy a folder. So we don't have any folder here. Let me first create a folder on my local host. Let's call this folder local host folder. This is a local host folder, and inside that folder, let me have another folder. Let me call this one folder 1. Then inside the folder, let me also have a text file. Let me call the app.py. So inside that local host, I have a folder 1 and I have a app.py. So for me to copy this local host folder into my remote host, let me first log into my remote host and let me show you there is nothing there yet. So if I clear this screen, if I do ls, you can see we don't have this local host folder in the remote host. So now how do I copy this local host folder into my remote host? Is to go to my local host, clear the screen, go to my local host and do the same thing, cp-i, then specify the key, specify the EC2 user, that is the user of the user that he wants to use to connect the local to the remote host, and the remote host IP address is, let me quickly copy that. This is the IP address of my remote host. So I'm going to paste the IP address here, and now this is me just connecting, I mean just specifying that I want to copy, secure copy to my, and I'm connecting to my remote host. Now the folder that I want to copy is going to be here between the key and the user. So the folder is called the local host. That is the folder. The folder is called the local host. And before I copy, because the folder is not all by itself. Let me first show you. Let's pretend as if we just want to send it directly like that. And if I do, I have to specify where I'm copying it to. So where I'm copying it to is also the local directory. It's also the local directory of, I mean, the home directory, the root part of the home directory. So just like specifying that home directory /home/EC2 user. But as I said earlier, if I don't want to specify the EC2 user or the full path, I can just do like this. So it's going to copy this to the directory of the EC2 user. So now I've specified that I want to copy. If I press enter here, it will give me error, and the reason being that it said SSH failed to upload localhost to that directory because it is not a regular file. So what I just need to do for that to be able to copy is to append a recursive command, which is -have. So this will specify like, okay, this is recursive, that I should copy this folder and copy everything inside that folder along. So with this, it has now copied. So if I connect to my local host again, if I connect to my remote host, oh, let me even do it this way. Let me create another bash. So I'm going to split the bash. So I'm going to use this SSH-i YouTube EC2 user at the IP address. Let me copy the IP address. I think I have the IP address here. So what we are seeing here, so this is going to be my remote host, and I'm going to also name it remote host. To rename this machine here to remote host, just do sudo host control, host name control, set host name, then specify the host name. I'm going to call it remote host. So then just do run bash to change it. So now I've changed this, I've renamed it to remote host. So you can see remote host, and this is my local host. So I don't have to switch again. So what I just need to do now, ls, you can see that we have moved the folder that is on my desktop. This folder was initially on my desktop. It is here. I copy it to the remote host. Now that I've copied the folder to my remote host, then how do we copy a folder that is on the remote host? How do we copy it to the local host? So the same process. Just go to the local host. I'm connecting back to my remote host. So how do I copy a folder on my remote host? How do I copy it to my local host? First thing first, let's first create a folder on our, okay, we have a folder already. We have, let me remove this folder here. Oh, okay, that's not the folder I want to remove. So this folder is inside here. So you can see that, let's name a folder here. Let's create a folder called, make a folder called remote host folder. So this is a folder that is created on remote host. So how do we copy this folder? If I do ls, you can see the folder, remote host folder. So how do we copy this folder from remote host to our local host? So all I just need is to go to my local host. At the end of the day, I want to see the folder among the folder that I have here, because I don't have any remote host folder here. I only have a local host folder. So to copy the folder, just do copy -r, then specify the key that you want to use to connect, specify your -r, -r, which is mean recursive. Then once you specify this, put in the EC2 user and the IP address of the remote host, then specify the path on the remote host where the folder that you want to copy is located. If you are not sure, just come to the remote host and do pwd. You can see the folder is here. So I can specify that with /home/ec2 user, or I don't want to do that, I can just do cdar. So this also is okay to be used. You can also use that. So now I have specified where the folder is. So the next thing to specify now is what folder do I want to copy. So the folder I want to copy is called remote host folder. So this is the remote host folder that I want to copy. Now I have all my command. The next thing to do now is to specify where on the local host do you want to copy the folder to. So I want to copy this folder to my home directory of the local host, and I want to put it on the desktop. And inside that desktop, there is a folder called YouTube. That is the folder I'm currently in. So I'm saying that I want to copy this folder that you are seeing here. I want to copy it into my YouTube folder, which is the folder I'm currently in here. So with this command now, if I press enter, it will move the folder on the remote host. You can see this folder that's on the remote host. It has make a copy of it on my local host. So this is how to copy a folder from remote host to the local host, and also how to copy a folder from local host to remote host. So we've covered all of the file sharing techniques that I have to cover today. We now learn how to copy a file from local host to a remote host. We also learn how to copy a file from a remote host to a local host. We learn how to copy a folder from a local host to a remote host. And we also learn how to copy a folder from a remote host to a local host. Now let's look at how to troubleshoot Linux, configure Linux networking. If you are writing a Linux and you want to connect from one computer to computer and it is not connecting, there are some commands that you can quickly run to quickly find out what is actually wrong. The first thing you need to do if you want to connect with two servers together, let me clear my screen. So let's say I have from my local host, I want to connect to my remote host, but I can't connect to the remote host. Maybe something is happening. Then the first thing I want to do, I want to get the IP address of where I'm connecting from. The IP address of where I'm connecting from. Let me get another server. Let me use two different servers this time around. So I have some of the server here. So let me pick this. This one does not have a public IP. So I'm going to pick the private IP. And if I go to this server here, if I want to do SSH, that I want to connect to the server. So the first thing I need to do for me to even connect, I need I'll need to make sure that I have the SSH key. So that is the key pair. And on the key pair, so I want to connect from this server to this second server, which is on so I want to connect to this server, but this server here does not have a public IP address. I want to use the private IP address to connect to it. So the first thing I need to do is to first connect to a public server, which is normally called a jump bus or a bastion host. Connect to the public server that they are in the same location. I mean, the same subnet or the same network. Then from the public subnet, connect to the private subnet. So these two, private no CMP and public no CMP, they are in the same subnet. So if I go to the public does not have an IP address, so I can quickly generate an IP address for it, public IP address, by creating an elastic IP address for it and attach it to the server. So now if I go back, it will have a public IP address now. So I can use that public IP address So click on it. It now has the public IP address. So if I go from my server here, I can ping that system and it's going to respond. You can see it doesn't respond. It's taking some time for it to respond. So for the fact that it's not responding, then that is a problem there. Although it's a public IP address, but despite that, it still can't respond. So the first thing I need to do is to start finding out what's wrong with this server that is not able to connect to the other server. So something must have gone wrong. So there are multiple things that you can do to troubleshoot this. There is what is called an IF config. The IF config is to get an IP address. For instance, if I want to know the IP address of this server, that's why I can't see it now because it's not showing anywhere. I can run IF config to get the IP address. So it's going to give me the IP address of this server. So it's giving me the IP address of this server. You can see the IP here, which is a let me stop the split screen so that I can see it boldly. So if I run it again, ifconfig, you can see the IP address of this server. This is the IP address here. This is the IP address of this server, and this is the local host of the server, and this is the IP address of the server. So from this server now, from this IP address, you can get an IP address by this. So I have the IP address, but it's actually not the IP address of this server that I need. I already have the IP address of the other server that I need. So the other thing, that IF config is just to get an IP address. The other thing that you can also do, once you already have the IP address, is to start pinging the second server. So, and if you want to ping a server, let's say I want to ping the other server that I want to connect to. This other server that I want to connect to must enable the pinging. Like I said, firstly, in my diagram here, that if you want to talk from and you want to communicate from one server to another, the server that you want to communicate with must allow the process that you want to use for the communication. When we are doing SSH, this server allow to be communicated to by SSH. That is why we can SSH to the server. But now, when we try to do ping, we were unable to connect to this server using ping, which is ICMP. So the reason is that the server here does not allow ICMP. That is why we are unable to ping that server. So the only thing that we can do before we can ping this server is for this server here to allow the ping port, is to enable the ping port. So on that server now, if I go back, this is the server here. If I go to my security group, this is the security group. If I opened it, if I open the security group, you will see that the server is not, it doesn't allow ICMP. The only mode of communication that it's allowed is SSH, and that is why we were able to SSH to the server. But now we want to do ICMP, but it doesn't allow it. So the only option now is to enable ICMP here. So if I edit this inbound and put allow all ICMP IPv4, then if I say, okay, allow it from everywhere, then it should now be able to communicate the ping. Now we should now be able to ping that server. So I copy the IP address again, go to ping, then put the IP address there. If I press enter now, you can now see the communication as established. So we use ping to establish, to troubleshoot communication between two servers. And also there is another one that is called trace route. The ping enables us to communicate from this server to this server. Is just to ensure, we use ping in troubleshooting just to ensure that these two server ping, which is ICMP, it's just to ensure that these two servers can communicate, that there is a network that established, or communication that is established between these two servers. But what if the communication first passed through another route before it gets here? How would you know? Or you have a connection that is telling you that it started to communicate, then suddenly it stopped. How do you know what or where the stopped come from? Let's say, for instance, if you try to communicate to this remote host, and let's call this one middleware server. So the communication might be, it first go to this server, and from this server pass the communication to the remote host. So if you do SSH, as long as this server here is sending this communication to this place, it will still connect. The SSH will still go through. If you do ICMP, as long as there is no problem and this server is still sending the communication here, it will still go through. But if you want to connect from here to here using trace route, if you do trace route from this server here, it will trace where are all the points or all the IP that this communication connected to before it actually reached its remote host. So the trace server, the trace route, will trace all the communication. It will first start from here. If we jump to here, it will be telling you everything, like, okay, the communication starts from this local host, then it jumped to this place, and it jumped to this place. So that way you can know how the route, or where the route passes through before it communicates to the remote host. But in a situation whereby your server couldn't connect, so now the ICMP can tell you that, oh, the server actually starts from here, and it was able to connect successfully to the middleware server, but the middleware server couldn't establish the communication. But if you are doing SSH, if there is a problem, SSH will not tell you, it will just stop there. It will not connect, it will not tell you anything. And the ICMP too will just stop there, it won't do anything. But trace routes, you will be able to know that, okay, this is where the network, or this is where the communication stopped. Then you can start your troubleshooting from this side, from your middleware, like, okay, why does this communication not established? So if you do trace routes with the same IP we put before, now you see it just shows that, okay, it's just one line of communication because it is within the same network. But let's do a trace route to something like Google. If we do trace route to something like google.com, you see it gives us a lot of connection, that these are all the routes that you are going to connect to before you eventually get to Google. So you use all of these, especially the ping, to establish communication and trace routes. And there are a lot of them that you can use, but because of our time, I just picked the two most used out of the command that you can use for troubleshooting. So this is all I have for you guys on networking. Now let's quickly for the last part of the class, which is like 7 minutes, let's take that to look at the introduction to shared scripting. So if you write a command, remember when we started and we are writing some command, especially when we configured web server and we deploy a website on our web server, we ran a lot of command. For instance, the first command we ran is that we first update our server by running sudo yum update. Then we put that y to automate the confirmation. So with this, this is a command. And when you write command, you can write multiple commands. But the problem with writing of command is that when you write one command, any other time that you need exactly the same command, you have to write it again. So you can write one command for 50 times if you need that command several times. So instead of writing the command every time, the best thing is to automate the process. So the first command that we wrote is called, if I go back up, is called sudo yum update -y. I can copy this command and create a file. I'm just going to call this file called script. Forget about the extension. Let's just call it script first. When I put this command here, then after I finish writing this command, the next command for us to deploy a web server is to download the Apache web server, which you can do with sudo yum install Apache or HTTPD. Depends on the operating system you are using. If you are using Ubuntu, it has to be Apache 2. But if you are using Red Hat family, it has to be HTTPD. So I also want to attach a auto confirmation there, and I'm going to copy this command as well. And I'm going to put it below this one. So I'm going to run this. So this command will download the HTTPD for us for our web server. Once we download the HTTPD, the next thing to do is to let me play my screen. The next thing to do is to ensure that the HTTPD is actually running. You know, when you download a software, it's not all software that will automatically start running. Some of them you need to run them manually, and some of them will start running by default. So let's check if this HTTPD is running by default by doing sudo systemctl system control. Let's check the status of the HTTPD. And you can see it's not running by default because it's dead, it's inactive. So we need to run this system. We need to run it. So to do that, just run the same code, but instead of status, change it to start. And now I'm going to copy this code again. And I'm going to paste it here. Every code because I use this code to start the process. That is why I copy it here. This one that I ran before this, the status, I don't really need it. I just need that to check a status, so I don't really need it. But this one, I use it to start the process. So that is why I'm copying it here. Then the next one I need to do, because every time, okay, let's check the status, whether the status is running now. HTTPD again. Now you can see now that the status is now active. So that means our HTTPD is running now. So, but the problem with this is that if we turn off this system, the HTTPD will stop. Then we have to run it again. So instead of running it all the time, I can write a command called sudo systemctl enable. This makes sure that every time we stop and start the server, the HTTPD will start running by itself. So I'm also going to copy this command and I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to run this command. So this command just say every time we stop the HTTP and every time we restart the server and the HTTP stopped, immediately when we run the server again, the HTTPD should start running again. So these are all the commands that I need. Then the next thing is for me to go to that website where we copied the templates, website templates. So to go to that website, the website is called the free SSS. So I'm going there, then I will copy the download link. So let me look at one of their good websites. Okay, this is the one we used the other day. Let's use this one again. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to open it, then go to the download, copy link address. Now that I have the link address, I need to go back to my terminal. So here I want to do widget, then paste the zip code. So now look at this command I'm running. I'm copying this. So I'm going to put the same command here, widget, then paste it here. And I'm going to press enter here. So this command will download the website on my server. If I do ls, you can see it has downloaded the website. So let me clear my screen so that you guys can see it clearly. So this command will download the website. Now that this command has downloaded the website, if you look, it is zipped. I don't want it zipped. So I can run another command called unzip. I'm unzipping it. And now that I've unzipped it, what I want to do, okay, I'm unzip, put the file. So if I press enter now, I need sudo. It's going to unzip this folder. So if I press enter now, then do ls, you can see it has unzip it. This is it here. So the command that I ran, let me clear this. This command that I ran to unzip it, I'm also going to copy that and put it here. Then let me do ls. So this is the file now. So now that we already have a folder that is unzipped and we have a folder that is zipped, I need to clear my system. So I need to delete this zip because I don't need it again. So with that, I can do remove -rf brown.zip. So with this, if it, let me copy, if it actually deletes it, you can see ls, you can see it has been deleted. So I need to copy this. This is the command that I used to delete the file after I unzip it. So after I did that, the next thing for me to do is, if I do ls, I have a folder that is zipped, that is unzipped. So I need to copy all the content of this folder. I need to send it to my HTML directory. So the location for the HTML directory, for me to go there, I can do move. I want to move, what do I want to move? I want to move this content here. Let me also put sudo. I want to move this content here, everything inside this file, inside this directory. So for me to do that, I just need to do copy the name of the directory and everything inside that directory, move it and paste it in the var /www /HTML. So it's going to move everything inside this directory. It's going to move it to this directory here. So if I press enter, so then I need to copy that. So let me copy that as well and paste it here. So now that I've pasted, that is everything I need. So let's go and see if we have a website that is running. So if I go to the IP address of that server that I'm currently using, this is the IP address, and if I paste it here, we expect to see a running website. Okay, we don't see a running website because we do not allow communication over HTTP. So I need to go to the security group and enable HTTP. So here we don't have HTTP, so we cannot view anything on this website over the browser. So for us to allow that, I'm just going to enable a browser, enable HTTP. So I'm going to save this, then I'm going to refresh. Let me see, am I using the correct server? I can check the IP address of this server with host name. Okay, let me check it with ifconfig. It is 17315. So I think I'm on the wrong server. Okay, this is the server that I'm supposed to connect to. That's the server I'm running on. So let me see, that server, does it have the SSH enabled? I mean, HTTP enabled. Okay, it has an HTTP enabled, so this server should be able to connect. I'm supposed to use this, not that one. Okay, you can see we have our server running. The server is now running. So now that we have the server running, if you look at this server here, this is a very beautiful server. But now in future time, if you want to deploy the same server, we don't need to run all the code again. All what we just need to do is to use this script. So this script, we're going to name it script dot. If you want to run it as a script, you have to be script.sh. So that this now make it a script, and every script should start with shebang, and the shebang is normally written in form of this -bin depend on the kind of bash that you are using. But me, I'm using bash like this. So this now, I just need to save this server. Anytime I want to run that same website, I just need to deploy this script by running this scripts. And tomorrow we are going to continue from how can you run a script and some other command that you can run on Linux. So I'm going to end the class here. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about different commands that you can run in Linux, and some Linux parameters or functions or command that you can run. So do you guys have any question for me? This is the time to ask. All right, if there is no question, I want to appreciate you guys for coming. Thank you. Let's meet tomorrow for the last day of the 7-day section. Thank you.